Welcome to the Coffee House, where in the next hour, many of our schools are failing. Unions are often blamed for coddling bad teachers. Randi Weingarten, president of the American Federation of Teachers, has a plan. The drug war is no longer headlines, but overflowing prisons testify there's hardly a ceasefire. What to do? We chat with Nkechi Taifa of the Open Society Institute. A climate bill was tough going in the Senate before the GOP victory in Massachusetts. Now what are the prospects? We asked John Passacantando, former director of Greenpeace USA. Also, poetry by Grace Cavalieri and Holly Bass.
The gesture, the nurture, the nature, transmission, reignition.
And music by Jimmy and Mundi. On the Coffee House.
Welcome to Worklife at the Coffee House. How to improve our schools is one of the critical questions facing our nation. Most everyone agrees we need school reform that puts students first. And many add that for schools to get better, teachers and their unions have to be part of the solution. Recently, the president of the American Federation of Teachers laid out her union's position on critical questions of school reform. The AFT has also entered into new agreements with school systems such as New Haven, Detroit, and Philadelphia that some are touting as models of school reform. With me to discuss all this is Randi Weingarten, president of the American Federation of Teachers. Welcome, Randi, to the Coffee House.
Great to be here.
Well, let's start with these new agreements in several cities. What are the key elements, in your view, of these new agreements?
Well, what you have is you have a new agreement in New Haven, Detroit, Philadelphia, St. Paul, Minnesota, and all of them try to accomplish the following. They try to say, let's turn around low-performing schools, focus like a laser on how to do it, management and labor together, creating both more flexibility and more voice for teachers. Second, in general, there's more voice for teachers because there's a notion finally understood in these cities that the critical ingredient is that connection between student and teacher. And if you don't actually create the voice that teachers are yearning for because they want to make a difference in the lives of kids, then you're not listening to what people are saying in the field, what people are saying in the trenches. And the third piece is how do you improve the evaluation system? And all of these agreements have a piece on that. How do you improve the evaluation system so that we're actually really getting to great teaching and great teachers? And that includes how do you help create a process for dismissal that is both accurate and fair. So focus on low-performing schools, turning them around. More voice for teachers, and a process by which to get to great teaching and great teachers, including a process for how to remove people, if necessary, fast and fairly.
Well, are these then models? Do you see these as models that could be extended to school systems across the country?
Look, I think these are great models, and they're not without controversy on all sides. And you know, look at Detroit. The Detroit teachers actually saved that school system. It's a tough contract, not just on the reform side. On the reform side, it's an interesting, innovative contract. But the teachers every month are actually foregoing some of their hard-earned wages to help save the city. So, you know, there's differences. Each of these agreements are tailored to the different situations, but the key is that teachers have to be part of the solution. What we've seen, frankly, in the last 8 years under the Bush administration is there was a focus on accountability. Some of it very important to shine the light on kids who had been left behind. But there was no focus on the program to help kids. And instead what happened was that schools and teachers were left with all of the responsibility. What we're saying is that we need to have both programs, not just to create and help great teachers or teachers become great and inculcate great teaching, but also how do we have programs for kids who are truly disadvantaged? How do we make sure we level the playing field by co-locating services there? How do we make sure we have robust curriculum? How do we help kids who are falling behind, plus kids who are real strivers? All those programmatic pieces have to be in place, not simply an accountability system that's focused only on schools and teachers.
Well, then let me ask you about, there's some of the efforts that are out there now to change the program and to develop the program. Now, there's charter schools, and I mean, in some ways that's a misnomer because it suggests a certain kind of a school when we know that it's a whole lot of different kinds of schools. But there are different kinds of charter schools. There's the KIPP schools and the uncommon schools and others that are out there. What's your assessment of some of the programs, some of the efforts that are out there to do just what you're suggesting, improve the program?
Right. Look, we need models that work, and we need to be able to replicate them. Part of what we suggested last week in the speech I delivered was we have to totally overhaul the teacher development and evaluation system. But most importantly, we have to understand that it's a systems problem. Because if we help one teacher become a great teacher, that's fantastic for those kids that teacher has. But the real key is, how do we replicate that success so that we know what works and replicate that, and we abandon what doesn't? So what's happened is that there's a lot of one-offs. So there may be a great charter school in one place, there may be a great public school in another place, but 90% of our kids go to public schools. We need to make sure we help all those kids. How do we lift all boats? So what we've said about charter schools, including the fact that the union I used to lead started 2 charter schools while I was its president. Right. So what we say about charter schools is they can be great incubators for instructional practice. They can be great incubators for labor relations practice. Let's learn from them and let's do what works and see if we can import that into other public schools. But what we shouldn't do is have them compete with each other. And what we shouldn't do is let charter schools, which happens sometimes, have some advantages that other public schools do not.
Well, are there any programs, either in the charter schools or in this, there's a lot of experimentation going on in the broader school systems as well. Is there anything that stands out in particular that you would commend our attention to?
Well, look, there's lots. I am blessed because I was the head of the New York City local teachers union for almost 12 years. And I've been the head of the American Federation of Teachers the last year and a half, and I've been in 50 different places around the country. So I get to see a lot of schools. So number one, the amount of hard work is incredible. The dedication of teachers is extraordinary. So what we need to do is look at the kinds of things that work. What I've seen in schools that work are tremendous connection between the adults. It's not a kumbaya moment, but it is working together to make sure that kids get a decent education. Teachers in some ways are physicians of the mind. They are making hundreds of different decisions every single hour, every single minute. So ultimately, the adults have to work together. That's why labor management relations have to be good. The second thing that we see is that in places like charter schools that work or public schools that work, we reduce the anonymity of kids. So whether you call it small class sizes or whether you reduce the student-teacher ratio, those things are important to really make sure that there's a real connection between teacher and child. The third thing in schools that work are that if kids are falling behind, we see that, we differentiate instruction, we help. If kids need to be strivers and need more, we see that, we differentiate instruction, we help, which means that teachers get the tools and the time they need to do that job. Now, I can go on and on. Great schools sometimes have great parental engagement. Great schools sometimes have a real sense of environment that works, and a sense of and a code of conduct that works. But the things that are really constant between great schools that work are great relationships between the adults in the building, all focus on helping kids achieve, but great relationships, not adversarial relationships, and ensuring that there's less anonymity with kids.
I want to go back to something you said earlier as one of the elements of some of the agreements that have been reached, and that's a process for evaluating and assessing teachers, and having a system in place that can effectively weed out underperforming teachers. Could you talk a little bit more about what you see as some of the key elements of a fair process, and maybe some examples of where it's been implemented?
So look, you know, there's a lot of confusion between the issue of whether somebody is effective and other kinds of discipline issues or dismissal kinds of issues. So let me talk about both for a second. No one wants teachers that are not effective. The issue becomes, how do we help teachers learn to be effective? Often teaching, like when I taught, you know, we used to tease about somebody just threw us the keys, we walked into our classroom, we closed the door, and it was pretty isolating. And maybe every now and then somebody would come in to say, oh, you're doing this right, you're doing this wrong, or would watch your practice. But that's not the way we create, grow, and nurture a great teaching corps. So what we've proposed is to say, let's create a development and evaluation system that's based upon helping all teachers become great teachers. And if they can't, then we help them. And if we can't help them, then we have a process that removes them from the profession. Not a glacial process, but we do this in a very expedient and timely but fair manner. So our evaluation system has several components. 1, teacher standards. 2, assessing teacher practice. 3, making sure that teachers have the tools and time they need to do a great job, including the mentoring and induction that they need. And when we talk about assessment of teacher practice, we're talking about including student learning in there, because obviously a lot of what we need to do is not just what we've taught, but what have kids learned. But where we differ from some of the folks that just think that there's a silver bullet for education, one panacea, is that when you talk about things like test scores or any other indicator of student learning, we have to have multiple measures, not just one snapshot of test scores, just like you can't have one snapshot of a principal walking in for 2 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes once a year. So, and even when we talk about test scores, we're thinking about how you look at an individual's child progressing, not comparing one set of test scores one year to another set of test scores another year.
We have a little bit of time left. What are some of your ideas and some of the approaches that you have to building the membership of the American Federation of Teachers and appealing to some of the new and very idealistic young teachers that are coming into the profession through Teach for America and some of the other programs? What's the plan of the AFT to be relevant and something that these new teachers will embrace? Well,
look, our movement has the same values it always had, which is, how do we help all kids succeed so that they can not simply dream their dreams but achieve them? And how do we help workers, whether they're teachers or other workers, have an ability to dream their dreams, to not simply live paycheck by paycheck, but to make sure that they have that vision both in school and outside, professional respect, economic respect, and dignity. And when you actually really act in the way you believe, a lot of your members want to be activists in the union. And so we welcome new teachers. We welcome them from any walk, you know, any place they start, whether it be Teach for America or the old-fashioned way. But at the end of the day, our union is about making a difference in the lives of kids and the others we serve, and we know the only way that that works is for our members to thrive.
Well, thank you, Randi Weingarten, for helping us understand where the AFT stands on the critical question of educational reform. Whether or not we are truly able to turn a corner on making schools work for all students, it does seem clear that teachers and their unions are going to play an important part. I'm Fred Feinstein, and this has been Worklife.
If poets would not go there, who would? Who else would give the children back to themselves, for the heart to report what the ear hears, so what they felt, they need not feel again? The children, by the time they were 5, had eaten from the tree of knowledge. They've seen the tiny betrayals. They have been given something people call love, but could not be named otherwise. How do we go into such a classroom? How do we make an ocean start? How will we find, when they fall down, what they were running from? We preserve the beloved. Rahman wants to preserve his father. He left us. He took care of me. He used to give me a bath. Luanda wants her baby sister, who is no longer here. Julio wants to keep forever his stepfather, who treats him equal, like his other son. Voices of the dream on the blackboard, the place behind it, opening, opening, in a tattered classroom in Paterson, New Jersey. All their bones broken, one by one, put back in place, luminous fragments of a poem. The silent child says, "The teacher's nice to everyone but me. That's how I know I'm special." Here is a pencil. You can write by its light. Love is hard to live with. It is a bird flying against the wind. The day you woke up with lashes across your back, you were born to write. Here, take this pencil. I was waiting for you before you were born. All you have is what I give you, a poem that refuses to die. All I have is what you give me, the courage to try.
Welcome to Courting Justice at the Coffee House. The United States has the highest incarceration rate in the world. There are over 2 million people in the nation's prisons and jails, in large part because of extremely harsh federal and state drug laws and policies. Nkechi Taifa is one of the nation's leading advocates for criminal justice reform and has been working on these issues for decades. She joins me today to talk about the latest developments and prospects for reform. Welcome, Nkechi, to the Coffee House.
I'm so glad to be here, Angela.
You have been working on all of these issues for quite a long time, but eliminating the disparity between crack and powder cocaine drug laws has truly been one of your main efforts. And I want to talk about some recent developments, but before we do that, can you explain what this issue is? What is this disparity between crack and powder cocaine?
Sure. Angela, for nearly 25 years, the federal government has sentenced those convicted of possessing or selling small quantities of crack cocaine far more severely than those convicted of possessing or selling other quantities of drugs. And what has come to be known as the 100-to-1 ratio. It takes 100 times the quantity of powder cocaine to receive the same sentence as one convicted of crack cocaine. What that actually means is that if you have 5 grams of crack cocaine, 5 grams, you receive a mandatory sentence for a first-time nonviolent offender of at least 5 years in prison. But it takes 500 grams of powder cocaine to get that same 5-year sentence.
So
now,
when you say 5 grams, can you give me an example?
I want to break it down for you right now, because many of us grew up in the educational system and we don't quite understand grams, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly.
So I'm going to break it down very graphically. We're here at the coffee house and we have a coffee cup right here. The amount of sugar that most people put in their coffee cup, a couple of packs of sugar, this is what 5 grams is. This quantity, if it were drugs, if it were crack cocaine, would give a first-time nonviolent offender 5 years in prison. We're not talking about large-scale drug kingpins. We're talking about very, very low-level players in the drug trade, many of whom should have treatment as opposed to incarceration. But it gets even deeper, because this disparity between crack and powder cocaine has a disproportionate impact on communities of color.
Why is that?
Well, some people might say it's because more blacks use crack than whites. The evidence and the science, the statistics do not bear that out. The studies have shown that overwhelmingly more Caucasians use crack than African Americans, but it is the manner in which law enforcement is deployed in primarily communities of color that has accounted for the large numbers of African Americans who are arrested, convicted, and incarcerated for these low-level crack cocaine offenses.
So more police officers are deployed in communities of color to actually do drug busts than in white communities?
Oh, absolutely. All communities use drugs. I mean, that's a well-known fact. All communities use drugs. But if you have the overwhelming amount of police resources in one community and not in the other, obviously more people from those communities that are more heavily enforced are going to be subject to the criminal justice system in higher numbers.
So the result is that you've got a much larger number of African Americans and other people of color incarcerated for these offenses than whites. Yeah. And when they are, the sentences are much, much longer.
That's correct. And actually, there's no pharmacological distinction between crack and powder cocaine.
That's what I wanted to ask you, because you heard, at least this has been going on for years, people saying, well, you know, crack is more dangerous than powder cocaine, therefore that's the reason why there's a difference in sentencing. Does the science bear that out?
I know it doesn't. First of all, crack is bad, crack is dangerous, crack is addictive, and so is powder cocaine. It's the same pharmacological drug. The only distinction is the manner in which it is ingested. You can't have crack cocaine unless you first have powder cocaine. And in fact, when you have powder cocaine, when you have crack cocaine, you're only talking about a 15-minute difference in a frying pan. So to have a sentence that is that much egregiously different, that much harsher for one form of the drug than the other form of the drug, particularly when the enforcement is so dramatically eschewed against one population, is really irrational.
So this has been going on for years. It's a federal law, but in recent years there's been some progress, I guess, towards eliminating or at least reducing the disparity, or some opportunities for that. As a result of a Supreme Court case and also maybe some action by the United States Sentencing Commission?
Yeah, well, actually, there has been no time within the past 20-something years where there has been a more activity around crack cocaine and the disparity and the reform with respect to that disparity than there has been at the present time. We have the United States Sentencing Commission, which 4 times over the past number of years has called for an elimination of the disparity. You have the United States Supreme Court, which has said that if judges disagree with these law mandatory sentences, that they have the ability to sentence below the mandatory sentence. You have the judiciary underneath the Supreme Court, who are sentencing not in regard to the mandatory sentence, but sentencing a little bit more rationally. We have the executive branch, Angela, the executive branch. We have the president, we have the attorney general, we have the Justice Department that has called for the complete elimination of this disparity.
Well,
the missing piece of the puzzle?
The legislative branch. And I wanted to ask you about that because I do want to talk a little bit about the Attorney General and his position and what effect you think they might have. But what is going on in the United States Congress around this issue? I mean, are there any efforts in the Congress to eliminate the disparity, reduce it, get rid of the mandatory minimums, for example?
Okay, well, there are efforts in the House. Congressman Bobby Scott has introduced a bill to eliminate this disparity. In the Senate, when now Vice President Biden was in the Senate, he introduced a bill to eliminate the disparity. And now Senator Durbin has taken up that fight as well. We are at a stage now wherein we have to get the support of the whole Congress so that this can become a reality. It's not just enough for a bill to be introduced. That bill has to go through markup, and that bill has to be passed on the floor of the House and the Senate. There have been hearings that have been held. Lanny Brewer, this Assistant Attorney General, testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee for the elimination of the disparity. We have police chiefs that have testified. Former Police Chief Timoney of the Miami Police Department.
Chiefs in support of eliminating
in support of the elimination. And Timoney is also the president of PERF, the Police Executive Research Forum, testified in support of reform. When John Bratton was police chief of Los Angeles, he too called for an end to the disparity. Police Chief Burbank in Utah called for the elimination of the disparity.
So with all of this law enforcement support, isn't there some hope that perhaps the Congress will...
Well, we need a little bit more law enforcement support. But I will say the problem is no legislature, it's very difficult, wants to be on record saying that they call for a change in drug laws, particularly when that change will call for a lowering of drug laws. It doesn't get votes back home, unfortunately, and it's difficult. I would say there's a lot of cover out there. There's cover because you have the president, you have the Attorney General. Attorney General Holder has been on record.
Well, yeah, I wanted to talk about that because certainly I think I remember President Obama during the campaign actually speaking out, for the elimination.
Yes,
didn't hear a whole lot about criminal justice issues, but he did, at least in a few speeches. And the Attorney General, since he's been in office, has made a very strong statement. I mean, what effect can his support for the elimination of the disparity have on Congress? Can it, do you think it will have some effect? Could he testify before Congress?
Well, he had his chief law enforcement official testifying. The position of the executive branch is clear, and Holder has been on record saying that the disparity undermines confidence in the criminal justice system. So everyone knows where the administration is on this issue. We need people to knock on the doors of their members of Congress, their representatives and their senators, imploring them to do the right thing. It's been nearly 25 years that this injustice has remained. And it's not just a racial issue. We talked about the low levels. I showed the sugar packets before, but this is what 50 grams looks like. The weight of an ordinary candy bar. These are not the large-scale kingpins. These are not the type of individuals who possess these low quantities that the federal government needs to be going after. The states can handle small quantities. The federal government needs to be dealing with the folk who are bringing it into the country by the boatloads and the cargo loads and the like.
So we're talking about the federal law. Do the state laws around crack and powder distribution and possession compare? Are there some states that have some mandatory minimums?
Yes, some states do, but by and large, the crack disparity, the 100-to-1 ratio, is basically a creature of the federal government. The majority of states do not have a distinction between the laws that stark and that severe. This is mainly on the federal level.
And of course, when a drug transaction takes place in a state, the prosecutors, sometimes the federal prosecutor can, I guess it depends on who starts the investigation. If it starts as a federal investigation, I assume it's going to be prosecuted federally. But the same act could be prosecuted either locally, and that's a choice primarily of the prosecutors.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yes, indeed.
So it's interesting because when this first started, there were some progressive people who voted for this law when it started. And what was the idea
many members of the
behind
Congressional Black Caucus, and in fact also many of the members who are now introducing bills to completely eliminate the disparity once voted in favor of it, because crack was absolutely a scourge in the community. I mean, nobody is saying that this is a drug, or any drug is welcome and anything along those lines. Communities don't want to be, communities want to be rid of drugs as well. But many times the laws and the legislation that we pass have unintended consequences. Right. And that is what happened with this law. There are many unintended consequences, the racial impact, the low-level people, just the mandatory minimums in general, where judges can't consider the circumstances of the individual in the case, such as the case of Kimber Smith, a young college student. She could have been someone like, you and I. The law needs to be changed.
Thank you, Nkechi Taifa, for sharing your insights with us today. For more information about criminal justice reform efforts, visit www.crackthedisparity.org. I'm Angela Davis, and this has been Courting Justice.
To all the bad brains for being bad brains. Transmission, the blood, the memory, the immunity or lack of AIDS, the rage, the riot or lack of, the quiet, the DNA, the way you wear your hat, the way you look in the morning without makeup, the gesture, the nurture, the nature, transmission, reignition, the post, the punk, the funk, the rock, the DNA, the DC, the hip-hop, the UHF, the bebop, the VHF, the blues, the jazz, the drum, DNA, 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 transmission, the energy, synergetic, syncretic, synthesis, dialysis, diuretic, kinetic, chemo, insulin, isoniazid, sputum, quinine, aspirin, detoxification, the blood. Transmission, the ether, the violence, the wireless, the radio wave, the TV, This is the emergency broadcasting, the signal, the explosion, the time, the lack of significance, the time, the lack of military preparedness, the ticking, the clock inside your blood, the one that keeps us on time, the one that makes you get up, the one that doesn't stop, that never stops, that won't stop, can't stop, won't stop, can't stop, won't stop, can't stop. Go on and on until the break of dawn.
Welcome to 21st Century Life here at the Coffee House. Unfortunately, global warming won't go away just because there was an inconvenient election in Massachusetts. 2009 was the second warmest year on record. The years 2000 to 2009 were the warmest decade ever measured by scientists. But support for the so-called cap-and-trade global warming bill in the U.S. Senate has dwindled in both parties since the election of Scott Brown, which begs the question, if not this bill, then what on global warming? Here to discuss the old and the new on climate policy in Washington, D.C. is John Passacantando, former director of Greenpeace USA and current president of Our Next Economy, LLC. Welcome, John, to the Coffee House.
Thanks, Mike.
Recently, there was an editorial cartoon in the Washington Post that showed a tombstone in a cemetery, and on the tombstone it said, "Cap and trade, died 2010. Do you believe that this bill that was passed by the House in June that would cap carbon and allow Wall Street trading and the rest, is it really dead?
I think that approach to dealing with global warming is dead. I think it was the culmination in a long history of environmental solutions that unfortunately became increasingly complex. And very smart people put this stuff together, but the approach that was taken that brought us this cap and trade bill was one that had so much politics in it. It was trying to buy off the nuclear industry, the coal industry, various key democratic states. It was trying to buy off the utilities.
And by this, they got subsidies. It's like 1,400 pages long, very, very complex. And every interest, every fossil fuel interest, you're saying got some kind of gift or subsidy out of it.
And even the agriculture interests got a big gift out of it. Worse still, the Wall Street trading houses were for it because it was going to involve this whole complex trading regime in carbon credits, something that the authors of the bill couldn't even understand and couldn't guarantee wouldn't create another credit bubble like we saw with the housing derivatives. So we need to solve global warming. This was the wrong way to go.
But you've made the point in the past. I mean, Congress has passed some good environmental bills, the Clean Air Act, getting lead out of gasoline. If it worked in the past, then we have cleaner rivers and cleaner air. Why can't it work with global warming?
I think the biggest difference in these approaches is that, say you want to stop ozone depletion, you've got to get certain chemicals out of the economy, the ozone depleting chemicals. But you're only dealing with a handful of manufacturers, people who are making the spray cans or air conditioners and that sort of thing. It was okay to sit down with those industries, give them something they needed, strike some deal with them so they'd use an alternative. When you're talking about global warming, you're talking about fossil fuels, you're talking about the energy that is used to fuel every aspect of our economy, of our lives, our businesses, our small businesses, our schools, our homes. So when you start trading there, when you start giving favors to this group, and then the farmers, and then the oil guys, and then the gas guys, and then the nuclear guys, before you know it, there's nothing left. There's nothing more to give away.
So the scale of the problem sort of outpaced our political habits. You're saying that you think that there's that something is coming that's more populist oriented, and you've even said it. You sort of see it with the teabagger movement and with the
Yes.
The conservatives. What do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean is, and I certainly don't mean to say that the teabaggers support a simpler way of solving global warming. It may unfortunately even be a litmus test for a teabagger to not believe in global warming. But one of the things the teabaggers are tapping into that I think is very real is that they don't trust Washington. They feel like increasingly these laws, whether it was the health care bill or the global warming cap and trade legislation, thousands of pages long, they feel like we don't trust Washington, something's happening there, I'm getting ripped off again. In order to tap into that kind of populist power, a political leader has to say, how can I take this thing down to its basics? How can I make it simple? All I'm trying to do is reduce greenhouse gases in the economy. Is there a simpler, fairer, and more transparent way to do that without needing 1,000 pages and buy-offs to all the industries that tell me they're going to oppose it unless they get something? I think there is.
Well, one thing that I think everyone in Washington is, as we said at the start of the show, is starting to agree on is that cap and trade is dead. So if not cap and trade, then what? What do you see coming that can tap this populist change that you say is maybe out there?
Well, there's a very innovative approach, and it has been introduced as a bill in the Senate. It's called the CLEAR Act, and it's bipartisan. It's sponsored by Democratic Senator Maria Cantwell of Washington State and Senator Collins of Maine, the Republican. One's a Democrat, one's a Republican, and they've put forth a very simple bill, 39 pages long. In fact, it only goes on to about 7 lines of the 39th page. And it says, we're going to deal with global warming just by putting a cap on where greenhouse gases come into the economy. It's only a couple thousand places. It doesn't require that much complexity. It's oil drilling, oil imports, gas drilling, gas imports, coal mining, those sources. And you say, here's the cap. We can't emit more than this amount of CO2. The government puts a cap on it. The cap gets tighter every year. And then the government sells permits to those entities to allow them to bring that much greenhouse gas into the economy. Their costs go up. They're going to have to pass those costs on to us. We need them to pass those costs on to us. That'll make us drive less, carpool, turn our thermostats to the appropriate number. But when the government auctions off all those permits, the auction, that will raise billions of dollars. What that means is every year, every American with a Social Security number will get a dividend check. So that's why this approach is called cap and dividend. So if you actually conserve, you'll come out ahead financially. So this is a brilliant way to deal with, to make it very simple, to reward Americans, to compensate them for this extra squeeze they're going to feel, and to give the right incentives to the economy to retool our economy to a low-carbon approach.
Well, I think there are a lot of people in Washington and across the country who agree it's an elegant idea. It was developed by Peter Barnes, the entrepreneur in California. Elegant, almost certainly will work. You know, as you say, penalizes bad behavior, rewards good behavior. But Congress never does, you know, always. You yourself have said, you know, it's unclear whether sensible policy and Congress go together. Why would this now work when they've already tried this cap and trade complex approach? Why switch? Why would Congress want to switch to this?
Well, we've taken the cap and trade approach, which was sort of the environmental approach to pretending we're Lyndon Johnson. We're trading and giving all sorts of political horse trading, and it hasn't worked. In fact, not only has it not worked, it's becoming a laughingstock. Senator Kerry is in a bit of trouble for having his own name on this kind of cap and trade approach. The House members, many of whom are Democrats, some of whom have tricky races coming up. Some of them are starting to wish they had never voted for the piece of cap and trade legislation that passed in the House of Representatives. So we've got to try a different approach. Most things seem like a long shot.
But even
in
some of the
Washington
environmental
today.
groups don't. I mean, many of the environmental groups still support cap and trade and see
true.
cap and dividend as cap and divide. Why can't even some of the leading environmental groups see the clarity of this bill if it has so much appeal?
I think some are coming around, and some may have the same problem with it that some of the industry groups do. They got hooked on the amount that the legislators were going to take the revenue from these auctioned permits. And suddenly, dollar signs got in their eyes about where they were going to spend this. You're going to use this on wildlife refuges. You're going to use this on buying off the coal industry. You're going to use this to bring on another senator here and another House member there. Instead, we're saying, that's not working. Wipe the slate clean.
So environmental groups are just another special interest.
Not just another special interest, but to some degree they began to play the special interest game. And the special interest game has ceased to work. So let's wipe that slate clean, and let's start off with a bill that's absolutely fair and transparent. Let's not assume that our republic is so corrupt that unless we buy off the utilities, we can't get anywhere. I don't believe I live in that country. I believe I live in a country where Americans still have a voice. And I don't think the utilities have an equal voice with me. I'm the citizen. They're a corporate entity.
Well,
their people can vote, but they're people, not their corpus.
Well, there are many who have said that the Massachusetts vote, Scott Brown winning a Republican in Massachusetts, sent the message that it really is the economy stupid. Americans really are concerned about jobs first. They'd like to solve global warming, but they'd also like their incomes to go up. This is one of the principal reasons that Republican Susan Collins supported the bill, is it not?
That's right. This is the only approach we've seen so far to global warming that's absolutely revenue neutral, and it helps individual Americans compensate them for these higher energy costs. And we need the higher energy costs, and that'll drive changes and a new economy.
So their dividends would be larger than their monthly increase in energy bills under the cap. But there is that 20%. The wealthiest Americans will lose out. So 80% of Americans either break even under this plan or their incomes rise. Is it going to just be called a tax on the rich then?
I don't think it's a tax on the rich. The wealthy, the analysis is that the wealthy will come out behind in this because they're driving big, heavy SUVs, they're heating and cooling very large homes. They can change those ways as well, or they can pay for that luxury. So in some ways, they don't need to be compensated for enjoying those larger luxuries. The middle class, working class, the poor, they come out ahead in this legislation, and that's an important thing in this economy.
So crystal ball for us, 2010, we all, there were many who said 2009 had to be the year. Obama, his first year, he's most powerful. He had a dream team of energy advisors. We were going to pass something in the summer leading up to the international treaty talks in Copenhagen. That all didn't happen. Copenhagen ended without a binding treaty. Now we're in 2010, an election year. Do you really see, if cap and trade is dead, the trading part, the capping and trading, do you see cap and dividend actually becoming law this year, or are we talking about a 2 or 3 year fight for this, what you think is a more sensible policy?
I really can't know. Here's all I know. Whether it could become law this year or next year, I know it could become law. I know it makes sense. I know that it actually fits to the campaign promises that candidate Obama made. He said he wanted a fair, just, transparent bill that compensated Americans. The bill that the White House has so far supported, that is the bill that passed in the House, is not Obama's bill. He brought in various environmentalists, and they went back and they did sort of a redo of the Clinton administration climate approach, which failed then. I don't know why he let them recycle this. I think he's not been paying attention to it. I'll grant him he's been awfully busy, and it's been a tough first year, but I believe if we can get him to pay attention to this bill, the CLEAR Act by Senators Cantwell and Collins, could give President Obama a big victory and do things the right way and the way he actually promised to do them.
Well, a big thanks to John Passacantando. If climate change policy really does become a pro-pocketbook issue for Congress and for hurting families, then 2010 really could finally be the year of solutions in Washington. I'm Mike Tidwell, and this has been 21st Century Life.
I woke up this morning and the sun refused to shine, and I knew my baby left me with some trouble in mind. It rained every morning and evening the same, and it's gonna be a long time till I hear the tooting train. When I looked out my window and I couldn't keep from crying, 'cause I saw that train leaving, take my baby down the line. The driver on that engine, he ain't no friend of mine. He's taking all the women and he's left me shout and tell of how the big man bottom is a living bird in hell. When your loving baby leaves you, it makes you feel so bad, makes you think about all those ladies and the good times you had. Don't leave me down here
Welcome, Jimmy. Welcome, Mundi.
Hello, Dave. Hello, Dave.
Pleasure to have you here on the
Great to
show,
see
on
you.
the Coffee House.
Great to be here.
Man, who are you touring with recently?
Emmylou Harris. We did Emmylou Harris summer tour, East Coast and West Coast last year. And
There's another Washingtonian native that took off, and you hardly see her around here anymore. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it was the gig at Wolf Trap was particularly good. It was like a homecoming for her too.
Yeah.
I don't really recall the number of people she had on her guest list, but it was up there.
Yeah, it was a better part of a couple of months, and that kind of cured us from touring for a while.
Yeah, it always looks glamorous to the people that aren't actually doing that. Right. You have a relatively new recording, oddly enough, called Jimmy Goudreau and Mundi Klein, 210 Train.
Lack of imagination. Though.
Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, it gets right to the point. Right. Tell me about this.
You go ahead.
Mundi's wife had an opportunity to do some speaking in England a couple of years back, and we decided, or he called me up and he said, you have some good contacts over there, you want to do a little mini tour to go along with this, what he planned to be a vacation, along with his wife's thing. So we put together a bit of a tour through England and Scotland, and in order to kind of support the tour, we put that CD together on our own.
Excellent.
To have something to sell and, to be representative of the duo. And after we got back, Rebel got a copy of it and said, well, if that's the only place you put it out, we'd like to put it out on Rebel.
That's always good.
Wow.
Which is great, yeah.
Yeah, that puts it into distribution and out it goes.
Right.
What tune did you guys open with? What was that?
We opened with the 210 Train, the title track. T. Campbell, Thomas Campbell wrote that song.
What are you going to take us out with?
I think we'll take you out with a 150-year-old song, which is also on the CD. It's called Sweet Sunny South.
Take it away, guys.
Thanks, Dave.
Take me back to the place where I first saw the light, to that sweet sunny south. Take me home, where the mockingbirds sing me to sleep in the night. Oh, why was I tempted to roam? I think with regret of the dear home I left, of the warm hearts that sheltered me there, of a wife and of dear ones of whom I'm bereft. For the old place again do I sigh. The path to our cottage, they say, has grown green, and the place is quite lonely around. And I know that the smiles and the forms I have seen now lie in the dark, mossy ground. To the place of my birth, where the children all played round the door, where they gathered wild blossoms that bloom round the path. They will echo our footsteps no more. Take me back, let me see what is left that I knew. Could it be that the old house is gone? Dear friends of my childhood, indeed must be few, and I must face death all alone. Take me back to the place where I first saw the light, to that sweet sunny south. to roam.